Hello, everyone. Welcome to the Aquarian Mind podcast. Today's podcast, episode number 120. I'm your host, Jamel Crothers. It's Book Insight Friday, and today I'm delving into character development in my books. Um, I feel like this is important to talk about because when you're a writer and you're an author and you're writing your stories, the biggest part is making sure that you create characters that are relatable in some ways, but they're also memorable. And the biggest part for me, and I think any book series, is the character development. And it's moving the story to where it's engaging. It keeps you, the reader, into the books that you're reading. And for me, there's always a challenge in that, especially when there are multiple characters in a book series, right? So there's a big difference in how I wrote the Struggles and Growth of a Man series, the Code Blue series, the World We Live in series, and the Kids with Guns series, right? So I'll break this down, right? When you look at the Struggles and Growth series and the Code Blue series, I'm really only dealing with two characters in those book series, right? So with the Struggles and Growth of a Man, it's Robert the majority of the series, and then I incorporate Michael into the series as the book series progresses. The Code Blue series, it's Gary and then his son Gary Jr. So those are the main components of the series. Obviously, Gary's the main character, and he's in pretty much the majority of the whole series, right? But then when you know, start looking into the World We Live in series, there's 19 characters throughout a 5-book series, right? So all 19 characters are in all 5 of those books. And I am writing their stories and what they're dealing with and their struggles and how are they going to progress in life, right? And then when you look at the Kids with Guns series, I have, I think, 24 to 25 characters in that series. So it's pushing the story along. Now, the Kids with Guns series, there are very few characters that are in all of the books. I would say about 5 to 6 characters are in all of the books. The rest of them, they're kind of spread out throughout the book series, right? So, you know, for me, it's keeping the characters relevant, seeing the growth, it's writing potential setbacks, because it's all part of writing stories. For me, I'm trying to write fictional stories that correlate to actually real life and what we're dealing with and what we're seeing on an everyday basis. Now, the way I go about it is reviewing what I've written in the previous book and then planning how I want to continue the story of a specific character. So I'm trying to think of okay, let's use the World We Live in series. And let's delve into Kevin. Kevin, because he's one of the main characters that I can remember off the top of my head. He's a homeless man and he's dealing with a lot of different struggles and ailments and, trying to get his life back on track after him having the life that he could have ever wanted and then losing himself and losing family and things of that nature, right? When I write part 1 and what he's dealing with as a homeless man, when you move into part 2, yeah, you want to talk about that, but then now it's, talking about how he got to that place. So now there's a backstory to it. And then part 3, it's, well, how am I going to get myself out of this situation? And then part 4 is, okay, I'm getting closer, but I'm still dealing with a couple of struggles. And then part 5, that's where, he kind of finally sees the light. He gets the help that he needs. There's that, one person that really takes a chance on him and gets him back to where he wants to be. So you see how, I'm able to write his story and push the story along and not keep it monotonous and in a stagnant place. That's one thing you don't want to do when you're writing stories with, whether it's one character, five characters in a book, whatever it is. You've got to make sure that you're pushing that story. And for me, I like to push the envelope a little bit with what I'm writing about, because I am writing about social issues. So yes, I do have to push the envelope a little bit. I do have to get you to think. I do have to, you know, twist and turn things a little bit. So that's kind of how I go about, writing, about specific characters. And, as a series progresses, sometimes things can become challenging, especially for characters who are in every book of a series. You see what I'm saying? When you have certain characters in like one or two books, there isn't as much to put into their stories. So with the Kids with Guns series, a guy like Lenny, who's part of the task force of looking for the shooters, I don't really have to push his story that much because, well, he's there for like one book and that's it. When you introduce new characters in like part two, like, Matthew and Max's parents, now you've got to introduce them, but you've got to introduce them in a way where it's going to engage the reader, but then you got to get the reader to think, well, are they going to be in the rest of the series, or is this going to be a one-shot deal? And the way I write it, it's okay, well, maybe they are going to be in part 3, and then they're in part 3, and then they're in part 4, and then they're in part 5. So then you're like, okay, now I have a story of the parents. You see what I'm saying? So that's, how I go about things. And for each character, you'll emote, you'll feel, you'll come to learn who they are. And, that's the ultimate goal for me. And sometimes you'll be happy, sometimes you'll be sad or angry at them, but that's part of writing social issue stories. And for me, I want you to always remember, I try my best to write fictional stories that, are really about real life situations that we are seeing in what we are dealing with. And I want you to remember these characters that I write about. I don't want you to think like, oh, well, he wrote about this character, this character. For me, I want you to remember at least one or two characters in the World We Live In series or the Kids with Guns series. With Struggles and Growth in Code Blue, you'll remember Robert, you'll remember Gary. The Private Investigator series, that's a continuation of the Code Blue series. So yes, you are going to remember Gary and you are going to remember Joe, because those are the two main characters that are in those books and in throughout that series. So for me, I just enjoy the process. I enjoy the grind. And it's fun for me to challenge myself. And now, I am back in the realm of like talking about social issues with men. And that's coming up, the second half of 2022. And there's a challenge in that. There was a challenge in me writing the Women's Worth series and really discussing women's issues. And having, characters that you'll remember in regards to them. And next year, I have a 12-book series that I'm working on, and, it's there's one character per story, and they're all telling their stories and what life is like living in a really tough neighborhood. So you come to understand like why I do what I do, but I don't want to sit here and Book Insight Friday talk about just books all the time. I want to talk about how I go into it and how I write these books and why I do what I do. Because I think there's nothing more fulfilling than for readers to really get a full perspective on how we as authors go through the process of writing these books and creating the content that we do, and what goes on in our minds when we are in the process of writing these books. And it's good for me that I write, the blogs not too long after I finish writing the books, and then I am able to turn these blogs into these podcasts. And a lot of times the podcasts end up being a little bit longer than the blog because I'm able to really verbalize way more. I can explain more, and I'm not, holding up, the reader in, a long drawn out blog, Blogs, I try to keep it 4 to 5 paragraphs. A podcast, I try to keep it 10 to 15 minutes. So I try to, keep it as engaging as possible. And that's just how I go about things. And I hope you guys are enjoying, all of this content that I'm creating for you guys, because this is not just about the moment. This is more about longevity and down the line, like 5 to 7 years from now, when someone comes upon a book of mine and they're reading it and they read a standalone or they read a book series and then they wonder, well, how did he write this book? Now you can come and find it, in podcast format and blog format, and even ask me questions on my contact form on my website. So anyway, that's my breakdown of character development, and you'll get some more character development podcasts in the near future. So stay tuned for that. And that is my that is my podcast for today. Sorry, my podcast for today. Hope you guys have a good weekend. Be good, everyone, and go accomplish your goals.